welcome to the last episode of the never-ending experiment. The experiment of life will continue, but this podcast is ending. I feel like I've gone through all of the topics that I wanted to talk about in essay format, and this video, audio, essay format has worked pretty well for me. I've learned quite a bit from this experience, and I hope that more people will still be able to listen to these episodes. They're not really based in the news or anything really current, so I feel like they can last beyond this final episode. So basically, this last episode, I want to talk about community. Community, along with the West, I feel like these two words are probably the most overused and used inappropriately. These words that have taken on such a big meaning, and yet I feel that we are using them really, really wrongly today. That wasn't necessarily the case in the past. So I've complained before in other episodes about how we are really misusing language and just using the wrong words because we're trying to be inoffensive, but we're actually just being incorrect. And I can't think of anything more offensive than getting words completely wrong and then just expecting other people to figure it out. English is a very international language now. People from all over the world speak it, and I think it's so crucial that we have a solid English language that can be understood across cultures, across the world, longer than every 6 months. We don't need to change words every 6 months. It seems to be how fast people are changing the words and the meanings of words. So the big issue that I have with community and how we talk about it today is that we're actually losing community. We're losing the genuine meaning of community, which is just everybody communicating, socializing, being together, working as a group. Community is, I think, really the backbone of society. Not the family, not marriage, but community. A lot of people will associate that with communism. Communism, I think, is a very separate thing that has to do with economics. The community itself is just about everybody in your area, in your group of people that are able to socialize as a group together regularly and to help each other out and to have fun, and I think that we are losing a lot of fun and we are losing a lot of community. And I think the reason for that is partly economic. I think a big part of it is overpopulation. And I think the saddest part about it is that we are using community inappropriately to mean a group of people with a trait in common. Now, if you're looking at an ethnic group, there is usually some actual community that's associated with it because out of family and people with a common language or culture, they tend to group together into a community. So sometimes there is an ethnic community or a cultural community. Right? So those often do exist. However, I think the problem is that you can still be a member of that group and not be a part of that community. There are plenty of people who have immigrated and they no longer speak the language of their ancestors. Their family might be loosely associated with a community of people that are like them, but they essentially aren't really a part of it. They don't really participate. They may not be able to understand certain things about that group. So just because you have the trait of a group of people does not mean that you belong to the community in the genuine sense of community, right? The gay community, this community has a reason for existing because sex is social. That has the very convenient purpose of allowing gay people to meet each other. The idea of community is heavily, heavily laden with the idea of communicating, socializing together. So If there is no socializing together, then why are you calling it a community? There are gay people who will meet a partner and then completely move away from the gay community and start, maybe they move into a small town, maybe they get involved in other activities that has nothing to do with being gay or queer or any of that. So just because you're gay doesn't mean that you're in the queer community, right? So we have to get realistic about what community means, because I think it's still a very useful notion and I think we need more of it. But if we keep abusing that word by using it inappropriately to mean a group of people with a trait, we're doing something really, really damaging, which is that you are making the assumption that this community of people all think the same. You think that they've had discussions with each other and that they have agreed on things. And all you have to do to understand this community is talk to one person from that community, thinking they're going to enlighten you about all of these discussions that happened within it as though you're all in agreement. And it's just so wrong. And what that's done is that it's shut down real intelligent discussion. So not only has it eroded actual communities, but it's actually eroded those false communities that you're identifying by pretending that they are indeed a community and not just a group of people with the same trait. Redhead community, is that even a thing? Like, yeah, there are certain groups who will get together and get all the redhead people together just to see, how unusual that is. That doesn't mean that redheads get together on a regular basis and socialize mostly with other redheads. This is a sign that we're misleading people about what the nature of community is. So if we weren't losing actual community at the same time that we're overusing the word community, it might be less concerning. But I think that actually the overuse of the word community is one of those things that's actually directly negatively affecting actual functioning communities, which is groups of people that get together and hang out together. Now, this whole discussion goes hand in hand with the idea of the death of friendships. I thought about doing a whole episode on that, but I think this is a little more appropriate to talk about that. But that's something that has been noted, measured, talked about by a number of different people, that so many friendships have just evaporated over the last decade. And that as well is about the erosion of community. I do believe that part of the reason is overpopulation. When I've moved from a less densely populated neighborhood, I met my neighbors more often than I did when I was living in a tightly packed apartment building where we saw each other every once in a while, but I actually spoke with them, my direct neighbors, less often than when you have a neighbor who's a little bit further apart. I grew up in Saskatchewan and it's the same thing. People live a lot further apart from each other, but they make a little bit more effort to socializing. And when they do socialize, they tend to do it for a little bit longer at a time than when you're in a busy city and a lot of your social interactions are very brief. So I feel that overpopulation is a big reason behind this destruction of community, which is really concerning, especially for the people who consider themselves to be humanists and are very anthropocentric, but yet the more that they encourage people to have more children, what they're actually doing is pulling people away from each other. Because when you introduce a new human into the world, that person will take up all of your time and energy, and you will actually be moving away from your relationships with other people. Of course, when we lived in a more communal environment, then having a child would just mean joining this community of children. The community of children, I think, is also really important. And I think we've really seen that erode as well, especially in the age of homeschooling and private schools and religious indoctrination and all of these philosophies that separate people from each other. And so that community of children is not as enriched as it used to be. Things like passing on songs and poems and games from child to child was a thing that I wasn't even fully aware of when you were a child, but then you learned that a lot of these songs and games were passed on actually for generations. And a lot of parents and adults forget those things because it's just passed on child to child, which is a really fascinating anthropological phenomenon. But the more that you separate children from each other, and again, economics plays a role in that as well, because economics supports a lot of instability because so many corporations and businesses come and go, and people are obligated to move to the place where they can make money rather than the place where they might be needed in the community. So we're constantly being asked to put money before community. So it's not one factor, I think, that's leading to this erosion of community. But I think one thing that we could consciously do is to be a lot more careful about how we use the word community. Because what it's doing is creating this sort of Truman Show alternate reality where people, totally unaware to what they're doing, speak about communities that they are not a part of with confidence that those communities exist. I think the craziest one that I saw that really just really exemplifies what I'm saying is someone who is comatose. I think they said the comatose community. The comatose community, can you imagine? People who are not conscious, who are not able to speak, who are not able to communicate, are being called a community of people. They are not a community. Disabled people may have a community, but in general, most disabled people are not a part of a disabled community, even the deaf community. And I have some more experience with that. I have relatives, and I also worked at a job as a relay operator. And, part of that role is to relay written and spoken words for people who are hard of hearing. And there is a community of sign language communicators who are mostly deaf, but not all. But there are deaf people who don't use sign language, or they don't use it very much. There are deaf people who are not engaged in the deaf community. So you have to be able to differentiate the communities that do exist, but also differentiate the people with those traits who are not actually a part of those communities, right? The deaf people who are not engaged in the deaf community will not appreciate being lumped in with them, to have you assume that they're in this community, that they're communicating all the time, and worse, this false notion that they all agree with each other on their political opinions or on their language opinions or what they think is offensive or inoffensive or whatever else. The fact is, some disabled people are the most offensive that you can imagine. A lot of disabled people have been through hell. They have been treated terribly by other people, and a lot of them couldn't care less about what is politically correct, about what is offensive or inoffensive, because they've been desensitized from all that language nonsense. And if you're physically disabled like myself, then you will really appreciate that the physical reality is a lot more important than your emotions about specific words that you may like or not like. So this is definitely part of the larger conversation about how we're misusing language in order to make it politically correct. I can't even say it's woke. I think woke is a different concept than politically correct. I think politically correct still has some meaning. This is another issue where I'm holding on to the word that was better in the past, even though a lot of people just want to throw it out. I noticed that even when I was talking about lowered baseline syndrome. And a lot of people are already calling it shifting baseline syndrome because they don't want to imply that it's getting worse. But it is getting worse. So I'm not going to change that word. And I don't want to change the word politically correct or incorrect either, because that has to do with the idea of correctness and that it is based in politics. Whereas woke, I see as a different concept entirely that has more to do with a mindset. It's less about language policing, but I think what happened was, again, because people are so hooked on just changing all of the words to be trendy, that they're using woke as a direct translation of politically correct. Whereas woke is more about when you like literally wake up, when you become aware of certain injustices and certain mentalities in the world that are harmful. I'm not against woke in that sense, but I think it is being misused a lot. But I think we need to address political correctness. And when you're using community as a politically correct way to talk about a group of people who have a trait in common, you need to stop using the word community and just use the word people or group, because that's what they are, right? Gay people are a group of people with the trait of being gay. They are not necessarily a member of the gay community. The community is a separate thing, and it does exist. As I said, like there is a disabled community that's very small because a lot of disabled people cannot logistically and practically engage in it. So it takes effort and it takes a certain specific environment in order for disabled people to even engage in that community. You know, I have a rare disease, ALS4. There is a community of people because they are all related and they all live in the same region. So there is something of a community that exists, but I'm not a part of it because I don't live anywhere near them and I have a mutation, right? So I'm an outsider in that community, even though I am technically a member of that group, right? I have the trait, but I'm not in the community necessarily. Well, I kind of am now because I have contact with them. But that's what I mean. You're doing real harm, especially to marginalized groups of people. And unfortunately, the word community, I think, gets overused specifically with marginalized communities, which is especially harmful because they need that ability to communicate and have a voice independently for their own well-being and their own empowerment. And if you categorize them into a false community based on a trait and then talk to a different person about this issue, whatever issue, and then you go to the wider community or group of people or whatever, and you tell them that this community believes such and such, you are directly harming people in that group with that trait by not allowing them to have a divergent opinion. And when it comes to disability, those divergences in opinions are going to be bigger than any other group because disabilities are all over the map and they are not the same as each other. We don't have the same opinions because we have had very different life experiences. And that's what I went over in my last episode on ableism. The worst thing that you can do for a marginalized person is to talk on their behalf, pretending you know what they think, without directly communicating with them. Them, just them, not the community. You see how using the word community tricks you into thinking that those people are hanging out with each other all the time. When you use the word community, you get an image in your head. You know, like the TV show Community is about a community college, right? There's an idea behind that that's real. They are communicating with each other. they are in a group of people, it is based on the existing community that is there. And usually community just could mean neighborhood, right? That's the biggest meaning of community. The community center is generally a neighborhood. But as soon as you add religion, culture, ethnicity, gender, physical traits, emotional traits, political agendas onto community, you are encouraging segregation, and you're stepping closer and closer into an apartheid type of world, which I think is extremely dangerous. And I think that's why we're losing community, is because we are falsely applying community in a segregationist manner. And the most heartbreaking part of all of that is it's coming from the left wing, which is supposed to be the more community oriented side of things. And I think this is also part of, I did another episode on left and right politics as well, because I really see left and right politics as just completely crumbling, and they've become almost meaningless. You know, but the only thing that's left over is that the left wing tries to seem like the more compassionate and empathetic side, but at the same time, these pernicious ideas have filtered into the left wing and made it support outrageously wrong ideas, like a lot of conservative values and a lot of segregationist ideologies. And there's been a lot of different opinions about segregation. Some people believe that segregation can be helpful because there's a feeling of community, of like, oh, community of people like me. I was excited to talk to a person who had my disease. I understand that feeling of communing, but at the same time, it's not necessary. And I think we've emphasized that idea to the point where people almost expect it. And again, overpopulation comes into play because there are so many people. You are more likely now to be able to meet a person who's more similar to you than you might have in the past, simply because we have more access to these different people. But at the same time, that socializing has become shallower, more fractured, more rare. And so it doesn't lend itself to creating real, solid, lifelong, long-term, even intergenerational communities. Most of our communities now are fleeting, and a lot of it has become more and more online, which comes with a whole host of other problems, especially as we're entering this age of AI domination. We're already dominated by algorithms that are shoving us into these segregationist piles as well. So I think it's important to open up the idea of community. And now this has come up too when I was talking about my book, and I was asked some questions about that. And this question came up about spirituality and community, because a lot of people use religion as a community. And the reason why I think that's a bad idea is because it centers your community in something that's very interior. I think that spirituality is very interior. But from what I've learned, and again, this is something that I went over in my book, Dreaming Life's Language, and what I've come to learn about our subconscious and the collective unconscious. I think that the collective unconscious, and what I'm calling the biospheric intelligence, which is that our DNA is actually giving us information filtering through our subconscious into our conscious mind, that's helping to determine what our thoughts are, that those ideas are automatically shared amongst all life forms, potentially all that exists, right? I think there's an existential level of reality, and then there's also the biospheric level of reality, which is all DNA organisms for all time, right? Going back into our ancient evolution and ancestry that we keep with us as well. And so if you look at community in that sense, I think that is really where the spiritual aspect of community is, which is that it's automatic. You are automatically in existence. You are automatically a life form. And so you have access to those communities simply by engaging with your own inner awareness. And I think that would take precedence above a segregated category of spiritual communities that are seeking these two different things. They're seeking spirituality, which is about going inward, and they're seeking community, which is about going outward and connecting with others. So I think that the more that we allow community to go beyond any trait, be it gender, ethnicity, culture, sexuality, whatever it is, the more that you go outside of that and into a community that is as broad as possible, including plants and animals, that is our community of existence that I think gives us the most intelligent and holistic and healing capacity. And that's, I think, where we need to base our communities and not base it on these smaller, trivial, segregationist ideas. And we need to stop pretending that those different groups of people are in communities, because what it does is it stops you from communicating directly with someone to ask them how they feel as an individual. And the best communities respect the individuals for who they are. And the more that you open up your community to many groups of people, then we have better communities. Maybe we can bring community back from the brink, because right now I do think community is severely under threat. And so I just hope that people stop using the word community inappropriately when they're not really talking about a communicating group of people who are socializing together, and stop pretending that those are little democracies where they can vote on what their opinions are, and you just have to ask one person and then claim that you know what everybody in that group thinks, because you don't. Because that's preventing you from that communicating. It's preventing you from creating actual community. And the only way you can do that is by dealing with individuals as they are and not making assumptions about them based on their traits. So that is my final word on my final podcast. Thank you so much to the people who have been following along this whole time, and welcome to the new people that are just discovering this now. And I hope that you listen to more of my episodes. So yeah, this is kind of wrapping up an era for the last couple of years and moving on into the next projects. And I hope you follow along. I'm going to be diving back into the film world, and I'm very hopeful that I will be making some movies in the next few years. Could be big, could be small, hopefully both. And thanks again for joining me. This is Kim Anderson on The Never Ending Experiment. Thanks.